Hello, welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. Just a week after our first race in Austria, we have a second one, and thankfully, this one was a little bit better than previously. There's a few more talking points in this one, but obviously, we still now have the situation where we've got Max Verstappen taking control of this race, but also the World Championship now. Chris, I think that it's it's becoming his season, isn't it? And he's pulling away from Hamilton and Mercedes, but also it's because they are not consistently finishing second. It's not like now we've got Verstappen, Hamilton in second. Today he had a terrible race. He never really has looked comfortable here in Austria. In fact, Bottas passed Hamilton today on track. So this is Verstappen's title now, and I think that we're actually what the question we need to ask is when are Mercedes going to be able to start pulling this back, if at all? And the question as well, what we've been looking at so far this season is, okay, this is a Red Bull track, this is a Mercedes track. But now it seems like we're going to have to switch that question up a little bit to a case of, is this going to be a Red Bull track where they're not going to be as good? And I think the question now is, rather than, because we've been looking at the calendar and the race calendar and saying, okay, this is a track that Mercedes are historically good at, this is a track that Red Bull are good at. And actually now I think we're going to have to start changing that question to like what we had to do with Mercedes, which was which track are Red Bull this season not going to be as strong at, rather than saying this is a Mercedes strength track, don't you think?
So, I think the issue here is that Mercedes have stopped trying. I think their plan was always, we are going to focus on the rules change in 2022 because we want to get that right. This is the car we're going in with only minor updates. But when Red Bull realized they had a real chance of winning it, Red Bull started funneling money into winning this season, which up till now, I don't think Mercedes have been willing to do. Now, I know there's been a bit of a tussle with Hamilton and Mercedes management where he said, well, no, look, this isn't right. Like, I want to fight for the title this year. I don't want to just write the year off the Verstappen. So I think there's upgrades coming at Silverstone now for Mercedes. Will that be enough? Will it be too little, too late? I'm not sure. It's not too late in the season for them to get it together. We're not at the halfway mark yet, despite how rampant Red Bull have been. And Red Bull have been, Mercedes levels of domination, really. There's been a Mercedes on the first or second step of the podium every single race, and they've won the last 5 on the bounce. So this is statistic of note. It is the first time that Max Verstappen has had a grand chelem of pole position, led every race, fastest lap, and the race victory. And that's how dominant they are. But I think that Mercedes are going to begin to fight back now. It's just, have they got enough time to turn it around? If the upgrades are as good as I think some people at Mercedes are suggesting, then yes, if Hamilton can find pole in Hungary, then you think it's going to be difficult for him to get past them there. Always goes well in Britain as well. Belgium, it'll be a battle of the fastest car. So if the upgrades have worked, you feel maybe the Mercedes will have the advantage there. But it's hard to say without seeing the upgrades on the car, isn't it? What do we predict will happen if the upgrades work? A closer fight. If the upgrades don't work, surely at this point, it's going to be a Verstappen title.
You'd be surprised if they were willing to throw this championship away just for next season and for the rule changes, because they are very proud of this consecutive record, aren't they? They're not going to like that blotch on their record. If say Red Bull win the title this season, then Mercedes come back and win it next season, they're not going to like that little kind of blip that they have this season. So, and also traditionally Mercedes have crushed the field in the second half of the season. We've always had that kind of false hope a lot of the time at the beginning of seasons, whether it was with Ferrari or with Red Bull, where they've kind of looked like they could challenge Mercedes, and then Mercedes just blitz the rest of the field towards the end of the season. So I think that you're right. I think in at Silverstone, Mercedes have generally gone pretty well. I think it would be great for the championship as well if Hamilton wins that race. He's going to get a big wave of momentum from the British crowd if he wins. It's going to be full capacity for what we've been told. And if the upgrades do work, then we have got a race weekend on our hands, and hopefully something that will really kind of have an impact on the title. I would be surprised if this season is over just yet. And like you said, they have got plenty of time to get back into it. And really, that's all we can say about Mercedes and Red Bull. It's just this kind of tussle between them, and we're expecting Mercedes to come back at some point. I think even though Verstappen had an incredibly dominant weekend, last 2 weekends, the person everybody's talking about this weekend is Lando Norris, because he had an amazing qualifying. He was very close to pole, very close to pole. And it was only just the last corner where he just had to make a slight correction where he lost his time. Going into the final corner, he was actually ahead of Verstappen on time. And it was just that last corner where he lost enough time to fall down to second. And then, of course, he had a great race. If he wasn't for the penalties, or the penalty that he received, he might well have been second. Is he now starting to prove that he's World Championship material?
He's certainly looking like a comfortable best of the rest, isn't he? I think that if Perez wasn't working out at Red Bull, we'd be beginning to talk about his Norris lining up for the seat. He's looking great. It's hard to say, because we have seen promising drivers at other teams make the step up and not make the step up. So unless the rule change results in a really dominant McLaren, which obviously everyone would love to see, it's difficult to say because he's never been outside of his team. But he is just looking more and more impressive this year. They're just such an accomplished, confident battler. And I think he was unlucky with the penalty yesterday, really. He should have got away with it, which would have got him second, which would have kept him ahead of Perez in the standings. But I mean, even in fourth and still comfortably ahead of Bottas, I think he's really looking like an ever more complete package. We came away from the race with Ricciardo saying, yes, things are getting better. I feel like I had a good day today. But you still don't want to talk about the good day Ricciardo had, because Norris, once again, just looked brilliant.
I think it's important to note Ricciardo's decent drive, because it shows that the McLaren is a good car. It is the best of the rest at the moment. There's no doubt in my mind that it's Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren. And I think that even though Ricciardo's not having the best of time in the car, it's obvious that the car has pace. Even though I think Lando Norris is driving that car to its limits, it's not like a George Russell situation where that Williams is a dog of a car and he's just somehow magic, like in some miracle pulling it up. This is a good car that Norris is getting the best out of. And I think that people are going to be watching for him next season. Next season, I think when we have the rule changes, when the cars change, I think that's going to be his season, his telltale season. That's going to be the one where he's going to springboard off, or whether it's going to be a case of, okay, he's a good driver, but he's not World Championship material. But so you mentioned the penalty that he received, and he probably would have finished in second had he not received that penalty. I personally think the race was marred by these silly penalties that were being given out. Norris was ahead in going into the corner and on the exit of the corner. When he pushed Perez off. I think you have every right as a driver to shut the door. And I do think that the onus is on the other driver to pull out if they think that it's potentially going to cost them some time, if they're going to end up in the gravel trap or off the track. I do think that onus is on that driver who is trying to overtake and who is behind. And then you have a similar situation where Perez did the same thing to Leclerc twice. And I think both times that the penalties were unwarranted. I think that if that had been in France, where there are where there's no gravel traps, essentially, I think that the penalties wouldn't have been given, because it looked a lot worse when you see Perez bouncing over the gravel trap, and he essentially lost 5 or more seconds. And so the stewards seemed to think that they needed to then punish the Norris or Perez for doing that. So is it a case of now that we don't have these gravel traps, or we don't have these clear kind of demarcations of runoff area? If you go off in France, you could just come straight back on, you just lose a tiny bit of time. Are we starting to become too sanitized in this sport now? Because that was racing. It happens in racing. It's a racing incident. I think, is this going too far now?
It's tricky, isn't it? I think there is an onus, especially so recently after that horrendous collision in Bahrain last year, that by some miracle didn't result in the death of Roman Grosjean, which was because of drivers fighting too hard and unnecessarily. But it's difficult. If you want powerful, fast cars on modern circuits, you have to pay attention to safety, because as you see much more often in America, if you don't, things go very wrong. I think there's a reason the fatality rate in US open wheel racing is much higher, and I think it's because these safety measures aren't there. So where do you draw the line? Do you take Sterling Moss's view that if there isn't like a high risk of death, then it isn't any fun? Do you think that like it would be worth reducing the power of the cars in order to promote like more aggressive racing? Do you return things like gravel traps that were, remember, phased out for safety? You can't, if you hit a gravel trap too fast, you go airborne and the car doesn't slow down until it goes into the wall. So there is a reason that we hardly ever see gravel now. And on a modern custom built circuit, I suppose you'd have a gravel trap and then you could have a 200-meter runoff area if you wanted. But there are a lot, F1 purists, are you going to remove Spa from the calendar? You don't really go fast enough at Monaco to crash, but the point still stands. Like a lot, there are very few places. You certainly couldn't do it at somewhere like Interlagos, which always delivers brilliant racing. You'd be a hard push to do it in Belgium. Look at coming out of Eau Rouge at full speed. You literally cannot move that barrier. What do you do to keep that safe? I think if you want fast, powerful racing as close to unregulated speeds as you can, then unfortunately it's going to necessitate increased intervention from the marshals. But it is annoying to see a racing incident get done like that, and I think it's part of the ongoing track limits argument, isn't it? What do we think of track limits? Should we be putting in things? Some tracks they're putting in these sausage curbs, but then the teams get all up in arms about the sausage curbs because a driver makes a mistake and it rips off part of the underside of the car. So I don't think Michael Massey has done a particularly good job as race director. I think there's been more questionable incidents under his command than not. But yeah, I don't think he can win on this. I think the teams want one thing, the racing public wants another, and everybody complains at him all of the time. As disappointing as it is to see a drive like Norris's be marred, because he was only 3 seconds from Bottas, so you can presume that he would have had that top spot given a chance.
I just think that the stewards have the benefit of hindsight. They can watch as many replays as they want. They can identify where the incident is on track and whether it was a safe or unsafe move. And this is what I think it is. I think obviously they came to that decision because he was forced into a gravel trap, which, like you said, nowadays at high speeds and the way the cars are, that they can be more dangerous than safe. But the problem is that corner has such a wide runoff area. It's the exit of a corner. So it's where the incident happened, and I'm talking specifically with Norris and Perez, and also Perez and Leclerc. It's not as high speed as an entrance to the corner. They've braked and they're sweeping out of it. There is plenty of runoff area, and as we saw later on in the last lap, in fact, there was a collision between Vettel and Raikkonen, which went into that same gravel trap. Both were fine because the speed that they were going was not fast enough to even necessarily reach the barriers at the end. And I just felt that this was the time where they really could have said, you know what, this was in an area that was okay. If it had been going into a place where there was less runoff area, say, I suppose, into the second to last corner, there's a very long space behind where there isn't a gravel trap. It's just a runoff area, but there's a bit of a less distance to go to the barrier. Then you could argue maybe, but to me, it felt like real sanitization, because it's not in an unsafe area. So I think that it's something that actually I don't envy the decisions that the stewards and Michael Massey has to make. And this, where do you draw the line? Because essentially he's drawing the line at where he thinks is safe and what is right. But to me, that's too far. To me, that crosses the line. But there we have it. And I think that the crash between Vettel and Kimi was a strange one, actually, because they just kind of banged front, right, and left rear wheel, took each other off into the gravel trap. But you feel like they would just get out and laugh about it and have a drink a little bit later on, considering the relationship between them. Let's talk about Ferrari quickly, because it seems to me that they're now having these types of weekends where they qualify quite poorly. They go on a bit of a recovery run. So their race pace is good, but their quali pace not so good. You can only do that for a certain amount of time, can't you, before it starts to really affect your championship?
Yeah, it's just you look at their results so far over the season, really, and none of it looks particularly impressive. The only result that was really important was Sainz at Monaco with that great drive to second. And it's just, you feel like they're getting better, and then they're dreadful. And the drivers are pretty nip and tuck, generally speaking. Like, one has a good week, the other one has a poor week, then it swaps round the following time. There is only 2 points between them. Leclerc on 62 points, Sainz on 60. But it's another wasted year, isn't it? It doesn't really matter because no one's looking at Ferrari this year. The story of this year isn't how terrible a Ferrari, because there are other teams doing worse than expected. And obviously everyone's busy looking at Verstappen dominating the field. But it can't be a nice feeling for the drivers. If I was Leclerc and I was watching Verstappen, who everyone felt had taken the greater risk perhaps in staying with Red Bull, beginning to absolutely dominate, I'd be beginning to question whether my machinery was ever going to give me what I needed to do well, because it's been a very long time since we've stood here and talked about the great future that he has. Apart from second place in Austria last year, no, a third in a very strange British race. There's been nothing. It's been average points finishes pretty much across the board, which after his first year at Ferrari must be so disappointing. And Sainz will be happy enough that he's keeping up, I'm sure. But if I was looking at that McLaren seat that I'd left, I'd wonder if I'd made the right decision as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Sainz would back himself to be picking up similar results to Norris, wouldn't he? And I think there is maybe a slight, he might be starting to regret his decision, but who knows? And I think as well with Ferrari, they're not under pressure from anybody behind in the Constructors' Championship. They're comfortably fourth. In fact, they're only 19 points off McLaren, who are having a wonderful season. If Ricciardo gets his act together, though, you would expect them to pull away. Whereas AlphaTauri have got about a third of the points that Ferrari have got. Aston Martin aren't firing, so they're not really under pressure from anybody. They're just going to lose that battle for third place essentially before the end of the season. You feel that's what's going to happen. I mentioned Aston Martin there briefly. They have only picked up 4 points over the last 2 races. They are limping through this season, really, aren't they? It's not the season they were hoping for right now.
Yeah, they are, for me, the biggest disappointment this season. I think I expected nothing from Alpine, so I'm not disappointed when Alpine delivered nothing. But after what the Racing Point looked like at the end of last year, it's just poor. It's really poor. And I'd love to know what it is that's gone wrong. Are other teams better and they haven't moved forward? Which I know is the argument they're giving, isn't it? They say the rules that affected Mercedes have affected them even worse, and they weren't as dominant as Mercedes to begin with. But like the Racing Point RP20 was a really, really good car. It scored 3 podiums and a win. And by the end of last season, you were looking for it. It was doing what Ferrari were doing this year, really. And then 2021 has dawned, and it's just been nowhere near at all. A strange second place at a strange Grand Prix that never fails to shake things up aside. What has there been to write home about? 5th place from Vettel in Monaco, maybe?
Well, that's the thing. They're non-existent, aren't they? Like, you don't notice them in the race. It's not like you're suddenly like, oh, we've got Lance Stroll is up in a podium position all of a sudden, like we get with Norris, and so it's not exactly. We're not seeing anything, are we? Are they going to be doing a similar thing to Mercedes, where they're going to be pushing to invest into next year's car?
You'd assume, wouldn't you? You'd imagine maybe there, because of the budget cap this year, we have seen, most notably, obviously, we've seen Haas just refuse to do any upgrades. They just fielded last year's car and gone with saving the money. But I think that is probably the case with Aston Martin. Mercedes have said it's the case, though. I foresee them backtracking on that, especially now Hamilton's re-signed for another 2 years. So it's hard to say. It's really disappointing because they, more than any other team perhaps, everyone had such universally high hopes of them coming into this year. And they've just done nothing with it. Not quite as nothing, however, as a certain Esteban Ocon, and more broadly his teammate as well in the Alpine. But then, as I said before, we didn't really expect the Alpine to do anything, did we? Everyone was like, Alpine, that'll be a whole thing, might be all right, might be rubbish. It's turning out pretty rubbish. But Ocon can't be happy with the season he's having. He's only had 4-point scoring finishes all year, which, for saying that we've had 9 races, is pretty poor, and 3 of them were 9th places anyway. Do I think he's under threat, which is a question he wrote in the script? No, I don't think. He just signed a new contract. He's French in a French team, which always matters for something. He is a promising young talent as well. It's just having a pretty dreadful season. And nobody ever looks good against Fernando Alonso. That also doesn't help. It doesn't matter how rubbish Alonso's machinery is. He'll still end your career pretty comfortably. Ocon will be comfortable. Ocon will stay. But there surely are another team with more eyes on next year. And I wonder if the original plan hadn't just been to rebrand this year because it was meant to be the rule change. And now it isn't the rule change, but it's too late to do anything about that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm not impressed with them either, really. And as long as the season goes on, the more and more average they look. Pierre Gasly, in what should be a second string car, is ahead of everyone in Aston Martin and Alpine. And Gasly's having a pretty decent season, let's be honest. He's finishing in the points almost every time. In fact, every time he's finished in the points. He had that nice 3rd place in Azerbaijan. A driver trapped, I think, with nowhere to go next year. You wonder if Alonso wouldn't just give it up when he realises this isn't going to be his year. And then Alpine would jump at the chance to sign 2 Frenchmen. But would you want to go to Alpine if you were Pierre Gasly? Nah, you wouldn't, would you? And it's a shame that he burnt his bridges at Red Bull, because unless Ricciardo calls it a day, which he isn't going to, or gets sacked, which he isn't going to, the only team worth going to, I think, is McLaren. Although, is it now too early to begin asking if his performances don't start to improve, will he be being offered a contract renewal next year?
Well, I think that's the thing. We like with Gasly, he's just got to bide his time, hasn't he? Because I feel like next season, at the end of next season, the Alpine seat will open up, the McLaren seat might, might open up. McLaren might be looking to move Ricciardo on and get somebody in, maybe who's younger, and pushing more. So Gasly's just got to bide his time, and then that's next season's going to be when he just has to keep this up. He has to keep doing what he's doing this season and next season, because I don't think the AlphaTauri is going to get much worse necessarily next season. So if he can continue to put in these strong performances, he's got a teammate who's not going to outshine him regularly, because he's just too young at the moment. It's going to take a while for Tsunoda to get up to Gasly levels. So yeah, it seems that that's his path at the moment, but he's in a bit of a difficult position. Let's move on to the final point then, which is usually is George Russell, who I was blown away by his qualifying appearances, like what he was doing in that Williams to get it into Q1 and to finish ninth as well. It's not like he just accepted he was in Q1 and just gave up. He was there. He got it. He qualified ninth. He put a decent lap in. It's incredible. And then he had a dodgy start at the beginning of the race, but pulled it back and was within 3 laps of getting his first point for Williams. I heard rumors on Twitter, and they are just rumors. I want to put this out there, and I'm not saying that I'm fully going along with it, but there are rumors he's already signed a Mercedes contract for next season, and he's going to be in that seat that Bottas is going to vacate. You can see why he would be in that seat now, can't you? This is it. This is his. Look what he's doing. It's sensational.
Yeah. We were wondering back at Imola, weren't we, whether he was trying too hard. But that little blip aside, when let's not forget he was racing a Mercedes for track position. But like he's had a better season than Giovinazzi. It's just that 10th place for Giovinazzi has given him the point. And it has to be said, in recent races, really, he's been as good as Raikkonen. So with a bit of luck going his way at either of the last 2 races, he could have been in 15th, and then we'd really be looking at. But nobody would be, I think, disputing at that point, especially when your teammate is dead last, but yet has improved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, surely Russell's going to be in that seat now. I mean, speculating feels a bit pointless, doesn't it? But yeah. He's just really wringing the neck of an awful car, and I'm just looking more and more impressive about it. He's getting through, and he went through in 10th from Q2 as well. It wasn't like he just snuck in at the cutoff. He was up there.
And this has been stoked as well by the fact that Hamilton's just signed a 2-year contract at Mercedes, which I don't think many of us were expecting at the beginning of this season. So Hamilton's going to stay, until he's 300, and Bottas is not doing very well this season. So he's ready. He's ready for that Mercedes seat, I would say. If Red Bull were willing to put a 17-year-old Max Verstappen in an AlphaTauri, and you can see his trajectory, you see how well he's done. If AlphaTauri were willing again to put a young Yuki Tsunoda in there, if McLaren were willing to give a 19-year-old Lando Norris, Williams were willing to give 19-year-old Lance Stroll a chance, George Russell at 22, what is he, 22? I think he'll be 23 by next season. A 23-year-old into that Mercedes seat. I think it's time. I think he's ready.
Yeah, no, I think he's ready. I think we need to see what will happen with Bottas at the end of the season, because Bottas is his second place. He had his best result of the season in Austria. Still not very good, but he's getting better. But is it going to be too little too late from him again? Is all the damage now done from the fallout in the early part of the season? And yeah, as you say, if they can put Max Verstappen in a Red Bull, Mercedes can put George Russell in their second seat. He deserves it. I can't wait to see him take his first win. I just want it to happen now, if I'm honest.
What a time that will be, yeah. Well, that's all we have time for on the Eau Rouge podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Next up, in 2 weeks' time, we are returning to the home of the Grand Prix, of the F1 Grand Prix, Great Britain, where by the sounds of things, it's going to be a capacity crowd, which is going to be absolutely fantastic to watch. And maybe we'll see Mercedes pulling it back in the World Championship. Thank you so much for listening. Please do give us a like and subscribe, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time.